Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cristina Martinez, and I am the Director of Long-Term Recovery and Major Initiatives for Adams County. Thank you for joining us this afternoon to learn a little bit more about the Adams County COVID-19 grant program. I have a number of colleagues that are joining me today, so if I'd just like to take a minute, if everybody can introduce themselves, the department they represent and their title, that would be wonderful. So Glenn, we will start with you and Jody on the Human Services side.
Yes, good afternoon. Glenn Robinson, Deputy Director for Human Services. Glad to see everybody on here.
Hello, I'm Jody Camerzell, and I am the Local Area Director for the Adams County Workforce and Business Center.
Thank you. Jenny, we'll turn it over to you and Ryan now.
Sure. So Jenny Grafton, Director of Community and Economic Development. Thank you all for being here.
Ryan Nelty, I'm the Deputy Director for Community and Economic Development and lead on a lot of our economic development efforts.
Thank you both. And Jim, we'll turn it over to you now, and then Kylan.
Thank you, Christina. Hi, my name is Jim Sidelecki. I'm a Deputy County Manager, and one of the departments I have the pleasure of working with is Human Services. We'll turn it over to Kylan, who works here in the County Manager's office as well.
So I'm Kylan. Like Jim said, I am an analyst in the County Manager's office, and I'm here in the background to collect all the questions that may be asked during the webinar. Kylan
is the one that makes all the magic happen. So thank you, colleagues, for joining us, and Kylan for your continued support in helping things run smoothly. So as Kylan alluded to, I'm going to jump into the presentation. Throughout, you are able to submit questions using the Q&A feature that you should see down at the bottom of your screen, or perhaps on the side, depending on the device that you're joining with. And then at the end of the presentation, we will open it up and Kylan will facilitate the questions that you've submitted throughout the presentation. And there will be an opportunity as well if you choose to use the raise your hand feature, and you can be unmuted so you can ask questions verbally as well if you're more comfortable with that process. So feel free to, as I said, jot those questions down and share them with the group. And with that, I will begin our presentation. So today's agenda, we're going to first and foremost talk about the funding that is coming through to Colorado and to Adams County, and then we're going to dive into the nuts and bolts about the COVID grant program. So who should apply, when to apply, how to apply, the funding criteria, and the 4 priority categories that our federal partners, our governor, as well as our Board of County Commissioners have established. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So back in March, Congress approved $350 billion to be made available through the American Rescue Plan Act for state governments, local governments, and qualifying tribal governments. The state of Colorado is receiving $3.8 billion. Separately, Adams County is receiving approximately $101 million, and we have about half of that in the bank right now. And we are expecting our second distribution in summer of 2022. So how are we going to be investing the first $50 million? The Board of County Commissioners has decided to divvy up the $50 million into 3 pieces of a pie. So the one that we're here to talk about and dive a little deeper in today is our external COVID-19 grant program. That's $35 million, about 70% of the funding. They've also set aside $10 million for internally identified projects. And then lastly, we have $5 million set aside for contingency. As we know, COVID-19 has continued to challenge us in ways that we haven't always been able to quite anticipate. So we want to ensure that we have some funding available if there are different needs or situations that arise over the coming months due to the pandemic. So thinking about that $35 million and the grant program that was created, who should apply? The board was very intentional in wanting to cast the widest of nets as possible. So businesses, non-governmental organizations, nonprofit organizations, school districts, special districts are all eligible to be able to apply for funds through the grant program. So right now we're in our informational webinar stage. So last week we started with webinars. They were topic-based according to the priorities that the Board of County Commissioners have identified. I do want to flag that the content of the slide deck is the same, but we wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to have my colleagues that are joining us today that are subject matter area experts to be able to answer questions that perhaps I'm unable to answer, and also for you all to have some familiar faces of folks that you've worked with over the years within the county. So we're going to make these webinars available on our website. They're all being recorded. The slide deck will also be available. So if you know of colleagues or other members in the community who weren't able to join, they're able to watch the recordings. On November 1st is when our application period will open. That's when the grant application will go live and folks can start submitting applications. The board has approved a 30-day application period, so grant applications will be due November 30th. Then we'll need some time as an organization to be able to review the applications and make recommendations to the board, who will ultimately decide who receives funding. And then in early 2022, we anticipate awarding grants to successful applicants. So how to apply? As I mentioned, the application will go live on November 1st. Here is the website where you can find the application. And then just a little disclaimer, want to make sure that folks understand that a submission of grant application is not a guarantee of funding. So what criteria do we have set up for our grant program? There's 4 big buckets to think about as you are working through your application. First and foremost are the federal requirements. These must be met for an application to be considered. The governor has set for COVID-19 priorities. The county has 6 goals that it operates on in its day-to-day business. And then lastly, the county commissioners have also identified 10 COVID-19 priorities specifically for the grant program. And I'll dive a little deeper into each of these categories in the next few slides. So starting with our federal funding criteria, it is of utmost importance to remember that applications must identify need or negative impact of COVID-19 and then identify how your proposed program, service, or other intervention addresses the need or impact created by COVID-19. Again, you're going to hear me emphasizing this throughout the presentation. All the applications must be related to and in response to the impacts of COVID-19. We know that there's a lot of other needs and really great ideas outside of COVID, but this particular grant program is only in response to the impacts of COVID-19. So a few more funding criteria. Again, there must have endured negative economic impact due to the COVID-19 public health emergency. An organization must be in good standing with state and local taxes, any licensing requirements, either at the state or federal level, and of course must be in compliance with any appropriate and local codes and ordinances. We also ask that an organization be in good standing with the Colorado Secretary of State. We're going to be asking a couple of financial questions as well of our applicants. One is going to be reporting any other governmental, private, or charitable assistance that you have received that supplanted any losses or offset revenue due to COVID. Separately, we're also going to ask if you've received any funding from the county, whether that be related to this project or not. We just want to have a more holistic perspective of the investment that the county has made in your organization. So think about, have you been a beneficiary of the community development block grants or the Adams County Foundation? We have a number of different funding sources, sponsorships that are made available by the county to support community-based organizations. Lastly, we decided that any national, state, or local elected office holders with business interests will not be eligible to apply for funding. So we've gotten a couple of questions around the application amount. So want to be very clear that there is no minimum and there is no maximum amount for which you can apply. We want to make sure that the needs of all organizations are met, whether that be, on the smaller end or a much larger project. So, please come in with an application that you feel is right for your organization and your need. Organizations can also submit more than one application. I want to highlight, though, that the scope of work for each application must be distinct. And if you're applying for more than once, you have to have the capacity from a staff perspective as well as financial perspective to be able to implement any and all of the applications that you're submitting. From a timing perspective, funds must be expended by December 31st, 2024. Now, that doesn't mean you need to have a 3-year program, but that is the deadline by which funds must be expended. If you have an intervention that will only take 6 months, that's great. You still meet that 2024 deadline. If you want to take the full time, that is fine as well. But at the end of the day, all dollars must be spent by December 31st, 2024. And the program or project or intervention must serve Adams County residents only. So if you're an organization that serves multiple counties, that's fine, as long as you're able to distinguish the services that are provided specifically to Adams County residents and ensure that the dollars being provided will go only to serve Adams County residents. And once again, funds requested must be used in response to COVID-19 itself or the harmful consequences of the economic disruptions resulting from or being exacerbated by COVID-19. So when you open up the application, when it goes live next week, you're going to see a table that's similar to this. These are the federal expenditure codes, and this table comes from the compliance and guidance document issued by US Treasury. So it's just a copy and paste from the federal guidance. So you'll need to check and select all of the expenditure code categories that relate to your project. You can have more than one, but you need to have at least one to be eligible for funding. So there are 7 different categories that the federal government has identified. The first is public health, and you can see on the screen what some of those associated costs and eligible costs are through public health. The second is negative economic impacts. This is focused more so on household assistance, job training, unemployment, direct economic assistance to small businesses, nonprofits, and other impacted industries. The third category is services to disproportionately impacted communities. Subcategories are education assistance, healthy childhood environments, housing support, and social determinants of health. Premium pay is category number 4. I want to note that premium pay is something that can be applied for as long as it is above and beyond normal salary and benefits. So this cannot supplant what you would have normally paid your staff and teams to provide services. Category number 5 is infrastructure, clean water, drinking water, and broadband. And then number 6 and 7 are more so for Adams County as an organization. This is revenue replacement for government services, as well as the cost and that it takes for us to stand up a program like this and administer $101 million for the county, including evaluation and data analysis. You'll see if you are so inclined and take time to read the hundreds of pages of the federal rule, there's a strong emphasis on evaluation and data analysis for the investment of these dollars, and we'll be looking for our grantees to be our partners in collecting that data as well. So the governor has identified 4 COVID-19 priorities. There are a couple of structures and committees and task forces that are meeting right now, and you can see the dollars that are attached to each of these priority areas. These groups are going to be making recommendations to the governor and the legislature for potential legislative action in the 2022 session. This will not impact an applicant's competitiveness, whether you fall within these categories or not. We just want to collect this data so that we continue to work with you as we learn more about the funding and programs that may become available through the 2022 session based on these 4 priority areas. The next is Adams County goals. These are the North Star by which the county operates and works on a day-to-day basis to provide services to Adams County residents. So we want to make sure that projects, proposals, interventions are supporting the county's overall goals as well. This next slide are the county identified COVID-19 grant funding priorities. So there are 10 categories that you can see on the screen, all based on the foundation of equity and putting people first. So if a project fits within one of these categories, you will receive extra points. Your project does not have to be within one of these categories as long as it meets one of the federal requirements. But again, if it is within one of these 10, you will receive extra points in the scoring process. So as I mentioned, there's a very large focus on equity. And I just want to be very clear from the onset that equity is race and ethnicity and lower socioeconomic status. We know that there is a lot of intersectionality, especially in Adams County, between those two categories. And we know that historically, people of color in particular have experienced inequities, and COVID-19 has only exacerbated those historical inequities that have existed in our society and in our community. So we're being very intentional on the data that we're collecting on the front end of the application and that we're going to use in the scoring process. It might be a little new and different for a lot of our applicants to provide this information, but we want to ensure that we understand who you are as an organization, who you serve, and how you are going to be working towards addressing inequities. So we're going to be asking, if you're a nonprofit, about your board and staff demographics, your composition. If you're a business owner, what are your ownership demographics, and then provide points accordingly. We're also going to be asking a few more questions around what type of work, specific inequities your work is going to address. So you can see a few of the other questions that we're going to be asking you to think about as you're submitting your application, and be very mindful of in the work that you're doing and how you're framing your project. So those are all of the criteria. So for those organizations that are ranked highly, that the Board of County Commissioners approves, what's next? So for those applicants that are going to be funded, we're going to ask you to sign a legal agreement with the county. And within that legal agreement, you'll be agreeing to monthly financial reporting as well as monthly data reporting. We have an internal performance team that is meeting, and we'll work with you as an individual organization to determine what makes the most sense for your organization, as well as based on the federal expenditure codes, what type of reporting is required for the federal government as well for the investment and expenditure of these dollars. We may also ask to come out to do in-person visits to see firsthand what type of projects and interventions you are implementing, and we'll work with you, of course, to get those scheduled. And then as a reminder, as I said earlier, funds must be expended by December 31st, 2024. So I'm only 3.5 months into my job, so I have had a quick and steep learning curve to get this program up and running. But these are a few of the resources that I have found helpful that hopefully you will find helpful as well as you are working on completing your application. So the first link that you'll see here is the link to where you can find our ongoing FAQs that we're working to develop, as well as where you'll submit your application and find a number of other resources available on the county website. The next is a link to Treasury. For those of you that are following federal activities closely, we know that the final rule has not been issued, but Treasury has provided guidance that as long as we're doing our best to implement based on the interim final rule language that's issued, we do have the ability to proceed. Our Board of County Commissioners know that there's a great amount of need that exists today, and that's why we're moving a little quicker than some of our peers in the metro area and across the country. My go-to reference document, though, is the compliance and reporting guidance. So I would strongly encourage that you take a look at that you understand some of the data reporting requirements that they'll be looking for as you're preparing your application. A couple of state resources. The Department of Local Affairs, or DOLA, has created a recovery funding spreadsheet. And so, if you're looking for additional sources of funding, this might be a good starting point for you. And then OEDIT, the Office of Economic Development and International Trade, continues to be a great resource for our business partners. NACO, the National Association of Counties, has a very good recovery clearinghouse. You can learn what other communities are doing and how they're implementing as well. And then, of course, since there is such a focus on race and equity in our application process, as well as through the federal rule, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity is a really good organization that has some resources that you might find helpful. So with that, we'll open it up for questions. This is my contact information. That is my cell phone number. Please feel free to call me, text me, or send me an email, whatever is more convenient for you. I'll leave that up just for a moment so you can note that. If you'd like, I want to be your thought partner, as do my colleagues on this call, as you're working through your application, to make sure that we are doing the best we absolutely can to help Adams County come back from this pandemic and really enter our phase of recovery and resiliency and be better off at the end of the day because of the investment of these dollars. So with that, Kylin, I will turn it back over to you and see what questions we have that have come through.
Awesome. So the only one we have so far is, where can the slide deck be found with the resource links?
So we will make that available on our website, and I will drop a link in to the chat so you know exactly where that is and can easily navigate to it.
We have no others yet, so if anyone has any, you can type it into the Q&A part in the bottom bar.
You can also raise your hand and Kylin will allow you to unmute and ask your question as well if that's more, if that's easier for you.
Are you open to general operating grants encompassing all of our programs, or do we need to submit each program individually?
It's really important to remember that funding applications must be tied to COVID. So a couple of examples, if you have had to hire additional staff or you've had an increase in caseload, there is an opportunity to submit funding for FTEs. I'll give you a couple of examples. Human Services, our colleagues on the panel today, we experienced a 30% caseload increase throughout the last year attributed to COVID. So we are hiring additional staff to be able to process those eligibility applications to make sure that folks have the wraparound services that they need to be able to take care of themselves and their families. So if you, we're also looking to hire additional outreach staff for individuals experiencing homelessness. We've seen for an increase in our homelessness population, as well as many of up to 60% of those are experiencing homelessness for the first time because of COVID. So think about it from that lens. You know, are your operations, do they need to grow or change or need additional support because of COVID, or is it other structural things? And so you'll need to be able to frame that in a way that it's very clear what the direct connection is between your operations and COVID itself and the response to COVID. Would anybody like to add anything else to that? Okay.
All right. Then we have, do you know when the second round of funds will be available?
Excellent question. So the county will be receiving its second American Rescue Plan Act distribution in the summer of 2022. That does not mean that there will be a second round of funding. To this point, the Board of County Commissioners has only decided how to invest its first $50 million. The second $50 million is to be determined. We anticipate, as I mentioned, legislation coming out of the 2022 session that could require leveraging of some of those dollars. There may be additional movement that we're watching at the federal level as well. So we do not know if there will be a second round of grant funding. So I encourage you as an organization, if this is something that you could benefit from and fits your organizational goals and priorities, that you submit now during the November application period, because there may not be another one.
Awesome. In the earlier slide, we saw COVID funds were $38 million. Are the other funds not being included in these RFAs?
So it's $35 million that are being made available to external partners. 10 million is being made available to internal priorities. So we had all of our departments put forward proposals for projects and needs that they've seen as from an organizational perspective to respond to COVID. We did a lot of vetting. We have a working group that has cross-representation from all of our departments, and we made recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners on how to invest those $10 million. So there's a number of projects and priorities that the community will benefit from directly through that investment. And I do know that we are one of the few counties that actually is making funds available in this way to community partners. Many of them are taking a slower approach or determining how to spend those more so from an organizational perspective versus a community-based perspective.
Ooh, we have two more now. If school districts are looking to apply, how does this funding conflict with other federal funding like ESSA and issues or concerns related to supplanting, such as workforce development and CTE programming?
Happy to have a more in-depth conversation with you about that, but we want these funds are a little more flexible than some of the other funds that you may have access to as a school district. So I would say be mindful of what scope of work you're looking to submit in your grant application for these funds. Really, does it meet one of those federal expenditure codes, and can it be spent by 2024? Whereas I know that a lot of the other school funding has much more intense restrictions than what these dollars may have. But happy to have a one-on-one conversation to better understand what you're thinking.
All right. And then we are a childcare and our enrollment decreased due to group limitations. And also we need more staff for being unable to mix classes due to tri-county orders. Can we apply for general operations due to a decrease in our income and having higher payroll responsibilities?
Yes, you can, as long as you have concrete data that supports the narrative that in fact it is tied to COVID. So think about, can you look back 3 years, 5 years and show us how, on the onset of COVID, you had a distinct drop off in number of clients being served or revenues. So think about it in that way from a historical perspective to date. And also if that is the best investment of dollars for your organization. Glenn or Jody, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I would look at also the demographics of your child care center, because that may be an angle that you want to lean into as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next we have, what time frame do we report the receipt of other county funds? And are we only reporting what funds we received to conduct activities in response to COVID only?
So there will be two different categories. One is in response to COVID, and that'll be within the application itself. There will be a little table that you can fill out that you can note the funding that you've received. So that's one. And then the second is general assistance that you've received from the county, whether it's related to your application or not. And there will be a second table to be able to report those revenues that you've received.
I represent a nonprofit event center. We would like to recover from rents missed due to organizations not meeting. Would we be in consideration?
Yes, very similar to the childcare question, where we would need the data to look back. How many events were you hosting? What were those revenues like? And then what was the impact from the onset of COVID moving forward? And some data around how you're coming up with the dollar amount that you'd be asking for. But yes, that is eligible.
Great. Will you be accepting any collaborative grants as long as there is detail included in the scope of work?
We would encourage collaborative grants. We always think it's great when our partners work together. We know that we can always do more when there are more folks at the table. So absolutely encourage that and hope that we see that come through the applications.
Right. The last one we have so far is, will there be Q&A sessions on the RFAs for applicants before the due date?
That's a great question. Yes, we can absolutely get those scheduled. That's not something that we had planned for, but we can set up a couple. Happy to do those maybe midpoint, so mid-November. We can get those calendared. Thank you for that suggestion.
Are there any more questions?
Would any of my colleagues like to add anything to the conversation? Okay, well, with that, we will give you a little bit. Oh, Jim, please.
Hi, Christina. I am just trying to get my camera off. Oh, the thing I wanted to add is that word of mouth is very important in our community. And so if all of you have found this useful or can help us spread the word of this program to other nonprofits and others who might benefit from these programs, please do. A lot of this is going to be from organic reach, you and your network of friends. So please help us spread the word, and that way we can improve the recovery and the resiliency in Adams County. So that's my only message. Thank you, Christina, for hosting today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate my colleagues and our community partners joining us today. Please do not hesitate to reach out. And I see one last question. Yes, we're working on an FAQs document. I was actually updating it. After each of these, we get a new and different question. So we'll be making that available on the website that I dropped in the chat as well. So please take a look there. And thank you again for joining us. Hope you all have a wonderful afternoon and looking forward to seeing your applications come through the door.